Yes, I was asked on condition that I agreed, which I don't, that Saddam Hussein was a bad guy. Why it was more important to remove him than to catch Osama bin Laden. I apologise for being blunt, but that's what they pay me for. Yeah. Anyone who says, okay, Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, has just proved they don't know what they're talking about. Bad guy does not cover it.
I suppose I'll start with Iraq, which was best described by, has best been captured by, under its old regime form, a brilliant author, an Iraqi English, half Iraqi, half English author called Kanan Makia, who had to write for a long time under a protective pseudonym of Samir al-Khalil, and wrote a tremendous book called The Republic of Fear, which is the best four-word description that one could have of the regime of Saddam Hussein. If you can get hold of it, and you can, if you go back to look at the program that Kanan Makia and Hodding Carter once did for public broadcasting, you can actually get to see one of the most chilling, annihilatingly chilling, actually, videos ever made in the 20th century. It shows the moment at which Saddam Hussein, the actual moment at which Saddam Hussein seized power in Iraq for himself. There's the Central Committee of the Ba'ath Party, perhaps 100 people, are sitting in a very formal array in a conference room. And Saddam Hussein is chairing them from a podium, smoking a large cigar. And suddenly, without warning to anyone, in is dragged between two guards and in chains, a broken man, a man who is obviously physically and mentally been utterly destroyed. His personality has been evacuated. And prodded a bit, he stumbles through a confession that implicates himself and others in a plot to destroy the Iraqi Republic, to remove the regime of the Ba'ath Party, and to ruin the Iraqi revolution, the counter-revolution. Having confessed for himself and having begged to be executed for his crimes, and having been reduced to a state of complete abjection, the man then says, the following members of this Central Committee were with me in this plot, and he begins to read out their names. Slowly. And as this happens, you can see it, the guards move every time a name is mentioned, and they grab the member of the Central Committee and lead him out of the door. And after about a dozen of these, there's panic. Sheer animal panic starts to spread among those who haven't yet been named. And in the hope that they're not going to be, they start screaming and jumping up and saying, "Glory to Saddam Hussein, our leader, all praise to him, the sun, the moon, the stars of Iraq," praying that it won't be them who are called next. Nothing makes any difference. The harvest just goes on randomly. They're taken off the chessboard and taken out until half of them are gone, and the rest are just limp and done for, and almost dying with relief that it wasn't them. It's the most extraordinary live show of a real, for keeps, political purge that you'll ever see. And then there's the second half, where the surviving half are told to go out in the yard and are given guns and are told to shoot the convicted half. Now they're in the plot. Now they are cemented to the leadership. Now, Kanan Makia in his book says correctly, he says, Hitler wouldn't have thought of that. Stalin didn't even think of that, and he thought about these things a lot, about how to get one member of the Central Committee to betray another member and keep them all guessing so that you're the ultimate beneficiary. But this, it's often, I think, very, very, very hard for people who live in civilized countries, democratic countries, to understand what it would be like to live even a day under a regime that was like this. I used to find in arguments about Iraq that I knew right away when someone didn't know what they were talking about. And the dead giveaway would always be when they would say, "All right, I agree, Saddam Hussein is a bad guy." I said, "No, that means you don't know anything about it. If that's what you think. You don't know what it would be like to be sitting at home wondering where your daughter was and finding out because the police came around and banging on the door, handed you a video while they stood there of her being raped by their colleagues, just to show you who was boss. The word evil, which I began with, I think does need a bit of justification. Many people think that to even use the word evil is sort of naive or morally too judgmental, or you know what I'm driving at, too simplistic. And yet it's somehow a word without which we cannot do. The person who spills their cup of coffee in the morning on a copy of the party paper that has the leader's picture on it, and everyone in the cafe goes completely quiet. You just desecrated a picture of the leader. The police are on their way now. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
Iraq had lost its sovereignty as far as a state can do under international law. There are 4 conditions under which a state may be deemed or said to have sacrificed its sovereignty. These are if it participates in regular aggressions against neighboring states or occupations of their territory, if it violates all the letter and spirit of the terms of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and in other words, fools around promiscuously with the illegal acquisition of weapons of mass destruction. Third, if it should violate the Genocide Convention, the signatories to which are obliged, without further notice, to act either to prevent or to punish genocide. And fourth, if it plays host to international gangsters, nihilists, terrorists and jihadists. Iraq met all these 4 conditions repeatedly. An impression, I think, ladies and gentlemen, has been allowed to form and perhaps even to coagulate and to congeal that it is only those of us who support the regime change, the revolutionary change in Iraq, who have any explaining to do. I think that that assumption needs to be counted from the very beginning. If you examine the record of the so-called anti-war movement in this country and imagine what would have happened had its counsel been listened to over the last 15 and more years, you would have a world in which the following would be the case. Saddam Hussein would be the owner and occupier of Kuwait. He would have succeeded in the annexation, not merely the invasion, but the abolition of an Arab and Muslim state that was a member of the Arab League and of the United Nations. And with these resources, as we now know, because he lost that war, he was attempting to equip himself with the most terrifying arsenal that it was possible for him to lay his hands on. That's one consequence of anti-war politics. That's what would have happened. Matter of principle. Matter of principle. Take the side of the victim. Support their struggle. You're just looking for a quiet life for liberalism. I hope you don't get it.
For human rights.
George's word, your Martin, so has not applied so far to the Serb. I think I know what's behind this. There are a lot of people who simply don't believe that a NATO country or a capitalist country can be a moral agent at all. After all, if they cared, why wouldn't they care about Tibet, Rwanda, Palestine? Yeah, we've heard all that. Yeah. Believe me. Look, I can make that case. In fact, I have made it in my sleeve. We don't have to be awake to make it, after all. Since we can't do everything, why don't we do nothing? right? Since we didn't help the Rwandans, and no one in the peace movement said we should, necessarily, live with that if you can, but don't fucking call me an imperialist for pointing it out, okay? Get real. I haven't started with Iraq. I haven't begun to tell you what it's like. The nearest I can come from personal experience would be, I suppose, being present when a mass grave in the Shia districts of the south was being opened, Hilla, near Babylon, just after the intervention in 2003. And I was there. I'd gone with a group of my fellow reporters, and the temperature in Iraq at midday around that time goes well above 100, and you have to be coated in sunscreen at all times, and you're coated in sweat anyway. And it gets in your hair and in your clothes and on your face. You're sort of covered in slime, in effect, protective slime. And that's fine until the wind gets up a bit as the mass grave is being excavated, and you find that you're being covered in a coat of powder, grey powder, which is made of people. It's the filth and the smut of people who've been buried en masse for a long time, are just being dug up and are being now blown around in a grave. And you want to feel dirty, if you want to feel dirtied up by the experience of fascism, try finding that you're 12 hours away from a shower and you can't get dead person out of your hair or off your face. There's nothing you can do about it. You're stuck with it, you're tainted, you're polluted, and you're living in a country, or visiting a country in this case, which is digging itself slowly out of a generalized mass grave.
I was having an oppressively normal morning at the dawn of 2007, flicking through the banality of quotidian email traffic, when I idly clicked on a message from a friend headed, "Seen this?" The attached item turned out to be a very well-written story by Teresa Watanabe of the Los Angeles Times. It described the death in Mosul, Iraq, of a young soldier from Irvine, California, named Mark Jennings Daly, and the unusual degree of emotion that his community was undergoing as a consequence. The emotion derived from a very moving statement that the boy had left behind, stating his reasons for having become a volunteer and bravely facing the prospect that his words might have to be read posthumously. In a way, the story was almost too perfect. This handsome lad had been born on the 4th of July, was a registered Democrat and self-described agnostic, a UCLA honors graduate, and during his college days had had fairly decided reservations about the war in Iraq. I read on, and actually printed the story out, and was turning a page when I saw the following. Somewhere along the way, he changed his mind. His family says there was no epiphany. Writings by author and columnist Christopher Hitchens on the moral case for war deeply influenced him. I don't exaggerate by much when I say that I froze. I certainly felt a very deep pang of cold dismay. Was it possible that I'd helped persuade someone I'd never met to place himself in the path of an IED? I don't remember ever feeling, in every allowable sense of the word, quite so hollow. I writhed around in my chair for a bit and decided that I ought to call Ms. Watanabe, who could not have been nicer. She anticipated the question I was too tongue-tied to ask. Would the Daly family, those whose house lay wrecked, be contactable? They'd actually like to hear from you. She kindly gave me the email address and the home number. So let me introduce you to one of the most generous and decent families in the United States. In the midst of their own grief to begin with, they took the trouble to try and make me feel better. I wasn't to worry about any guilt or responsibility. Their son had signed up with his eyes wide open and had assured us that if he knew the possible outcome might be this, he would still go, rather than have the option of living to age 50 and never having served his country. Prior to his deployment, he told us he was going to try to contact you from Iraq. He had the idea of being a correspondent from the front lines through you, and wanted to get your opinion about his journalistic potential. Mark had told his father that he had 3 wishes in the event of his death. He wanted bagpipes played at the service and an Irish wake to follow it, and he wanted to be cremated, with the ashes strewn on the beach at Nesco in Oregon, the setting for his happiest memories of boyhood vacations. So it was that in August I found myself on the dunes by an especially lovely and remote stretch of the Oregon coastline. As the sun began to sink on a day that had been devoted to reminiscence and moderate drinking, we took up the tattered stars and stripes that had flown outside the family home since Mark's deployment, and walked to his favourite spot to plant it. Everyone was supposed to say something, but when John Daly took the first scoop from the urn and spread the ashes on the breeze, there was something so unutterably final in the gesture that tears seemed as natural as breathing, and I wasn't at all sure that I could go through with it. I became a trifle choked up after that, but everybody else also managed to speak, often reading poems of their own composition. And as the day ebbed in a blaze of glory over the ocean, I thought, well, here we are to perform the last honours for the warrior and hero, and there are no hysterical ululations, no shrieks for revenge, no insults hurled at the enemy, no firing into the air or bogus hysterics. Instead, an honest, brave, modest family is doing its private best. In the last analysis, it was quite clear. Mark had made up his mind that the United States was a force for good in the world, and that it had a duty to the freedom of others. I have a photograph of him standing bareheaded and contentedly smoking a cigar on a rooftop in Mosul. He doesn't look like an occupier at all. He looks like a staunch friend and defender. On the photograph is written, "We carry a new world in our hearts." May it be so then, and may death be not proud to have taken Mark Daly, whom I never knew, but whom you now know little, and, I hope, miss.